the global stage is heating up in a way that feels straight out of a high-stakes geopolitical thriller, as tensions between the United States and Iran continue to ripple across multiple regions with unpredictable intensity. What began as a strategic confrontation has now evolved into a complex, multi-layered situation involving airspace incidents, diplomatic maneuvering, and rising uncertainty about what comes next. One of the most gripping developments right now is the urgent effort to locate a missing crew member from a U.S. military aircraft that went down under highly contested circumstances. While one individual has been recovered safely, the search for the second continues in a remote and challenging terrain, adding a human dimension to an already tense situation. Officials are being cautious with their words, but behind the scenes, the pressure is mounting as every passing hour raises concerns. Meanwhile, reports circulating from different sources suggest that advanced aerial systems have been impacted during recent engagements, signaling that this situation is far from one-sided. Despite earlier confident statements suggesting complete dominance, the evolving reality appears far more complicated, reminding observers worldwide that modern conflict is rarely predictable or straightforward. At the same time, the broader region is witnessing a surge in activity that stretches beyond direct confrontation. In Israel, repeated alerts have been triggered throughout the day due to incoming projectiles, with defense systems working continuously to neutralize threats mid-air. While most incidents have been contained, some have still resulted in structural damage in residential zones, creating scenes of chaos and urgency. Emergency crews have been quick to respond, ensuring civilians are moved to safety while assessing the aftermath. Fortunately, reports of severe injuries remain limited, but the psychological impact on communities living under constant alerts is becoming increasingly evident. Adding another layer to the situation, cross-border tensions in Lebanon continue to simmer, with ongoing exchanges contributing to a rising toll. Officials have acknowledged that one recent loss was the result of unintended circumstances, highlighting how complex and fast-moving environments can lead to tragic outcomes, even without direct confrontation. These developments collectively paint a picture of a region under immense strain, where multiple flashpoints are active at the same time. On the diplomatic front, efforts to bring some form of stability are still underway, though progress appears slow and uncertain. Pakistan has positioned itself as a key intermediary, working alongside regional partners to facilitate dialogue between Washington and Tehran. While speculation had suggested that talks might be stalled, officials have clarified that communication channels remain open and active. Iran has also publicly indicated its willingness to engage, but only under conditions that promise a long-term and meaningful resolution, rather than a temporary pause. This insistence on lasting outcomes reflects the deeper mistrust that has built up over time, making negotiations far more complex than they might appear on the surface. Behind closed doors, multiple countries are reportedly working on frameworks that could pave the way for a ceasefire, at least temporarily, allowing space for diplomacy to take center stage. However, no official timeline has been confirmed, leaving the world watching closely for any sign of a breakthrough. Beyond the immediate conflict zones, the impact is being felt across critical global systems, particularly energy and trade routes. Strategic waterways, which serve as lifelines for international commerce, are now at the center of growing concern. Any disruption in these routes has the potential to send shockwaves through global markets, affecting everything from fuel prices to supply chains. Recent movements of commercial vessels through these manatiq have been closely monitored, with shipping companies taking extra precautions to ensure safety. Some routes have already experienced delays or rerouting, reflecting the heightened risk environment. Meanwhile, countries heavily dependent on energy imports are exploring alternative strategies to maintain stability, highlighting how interconnected the global economy truly is. Even regions far removed from the immediate conflict are beginning to feel the indirect consequences, as uncertainty drives volatility in key sectors. Adding to the complexity, humanitarian concerns are also beginning to surface more prominently. Facilities that are not directly involved in any military activity have still experienced damage due to nearby incidents, raising questions about safety and preparedness. In one case, a medical center specializing in mental health services reported significant structural impact after a nearby blast, though fortunately no lives were lost. Incidents like these underline how the ripple effects of conflict can extend far beyond intended targets, affecting everyday life in unexpected ways. Aid organizations and local authorities are working to manage these challenges, but resources are being stretched thin as the situation continues to evolve. At the same time, reports of increased internal pressure within certain countries suggest that the social and political dimensions of this situation are also intensifying, adding yet another layer of complexity to an already intricate scenario. As the situation continues to evolve at a rapid pace, the intensity of aerial activity across the region is becoming one of the most defining features of this ongoing crisis. Multiple waves of incoming projectiles have been detected within short intervals, keeping defense systems on constant alert and pushing response teams to operate at maximum capacity. In several instances, warning sirens echoed across major urban areas, sending residents rushing for shelter as intercept systems sprang into action. While many of these threats were successfully neutralized mid-air, the sheer frequency of launches has raised serious concerns among analysts about sustainability and escalation. In a few cases, debris from interceptions or partial impacts has caused visible damage to buildings and infrastructure, turning ordinary neighborhoods into scenes of broken glass, smoke, and scattered wreckage. Emergency responders have been working tirelessly, navigating through tight spaces and hazardous conditions to secure affected sites and assist civilians. Reports indicate that injuries have remained relatively minor so far, but the emotional strain on communities living under repeated alerts is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, regional dynamics are growing even more complicated as multiple actors become involved, each with their own strategic priorities. In the north, cross-border exchanges continue to add pressure, with intermittent launches and countermeasures creating a tense and unpredictable environment. Defense officials are maintaining a high level of readiness, closely monitoring every movement and adjusting their responses in real time. What makes the situation particularly complex is the overlapping nature of these developments. While one area is dealing with aerial alerts, another is facing ground-level incidents, and yet another is managing diplomatic fallout. This multi-front reality is stretching resources and attention, making coordination more critical than ever. Observers note that even minor miscalculations in such a tightly wound environment could lead to unintended consequences, emphasizing the fragile balance that currently exists. At the same time, claims and counterclaims regarding recent engagements are adding an element of information warfare to the situation. Statements from various sides have highlighted incidents involving advanced aircraft and aerial systems, though independent verification remains limited in some cases. These narratives, whether fully confirmed or not, play a significant role in shaping public perception and influencing strategic messaging. For audiences around the world, separating confirmed developments from speculative reports has become increasingly challenging, especially as updates continue to pour in from multiple channels. Analysts suggest that this information battle is not just about controlling the narrative, but also about signaling strength, resilience, and capability to both domestic and international audiences. In this environment, every statement carries weight, and even subtle shifts in language can hint at deeper strategic intentions. On another front, the humanitarian dimension of the crisis continues to quietly expand, often overshadowed by the more dramatic headlines. Casualties from isolated incidents are being reported, including strikes that have impacted civilian vehicles and nearby el-Mandeb, underscoring the unpredictable nature of the situation. Medical facilities are receiving the injured while trying to maintain normal operations under increasingly difficult circumstances. Health officials are working under pressure, dealing not only with physical injuries but also with the psychological toll that prolonged tanaw can have on individuals and communities. In areas that have experienced repeated disruptions, access to basic services is becoming a growing concern, prompting local authorities to implement contingency measures wherever possible. Aid organizations are also stepping in to provide support, though their efforts are often constrained by the rapidly changing conditions on the ground. Amid all of this, the broader geopolitical implications are beginning to take clearer shape. Countries across the region and beyond are recalibrating their positions, weighing risks, and considering how best to protect their interests in an increasingly uncertain environment. Some nations are strengthening their defensive postures, while others are focusing on diplomatic outreach in hopes of preventing further escalation. Behind the scenes, High-level communications are ongoing, with leaders and officials engaging in discussions that could potentially influence the direction of events in the coming days. However, the path forward remains unclear, as competing priorities and deep-rooted mistrust continue to complicate efforts toward de-escalation. For now, the world remains on edge, watching closely as each new development adds another piece to an already complex and rapidly unfolding puzzle. While the sound of sirens and the intensity of aerial activity dominate headlines, a quieter but equally critical battle is unfolding behind closed doors, one driven by diplomacy, strategic messaging, and the race to prevent the situation from spiraling further out of control. Multiple countries have stepped into the role of mediators, attempting to bridge a gap that has been widening with every passing day. Among them, Pakistan has emerged as a key facilitator, working in coordination with regional players to create a possible pathway toward dialogue. Officials have made it clear that despite rumors of setbacks, communication channels have not collapsed. In fact, they remain active, though highly sensitive. The challenge, however, lies not just in bringing both sides to the table, but in defining terms that are acceptable, sustainable, and capable of delivering more than just a temporary pause. Iran has signaled openness to discussions, but with a firm stance that any agreement must guarantee a long-term resolution, not a short-lived arrangement that simply delays the next round of tension. At the same time, global leaders are increasingly engaging in high-level visits and strategic discussions aimed at stabilizing the broader region. Diplomatic tours across key Khalij nations have taken on new urgency, with talks focusing not only on security concerns, but also on economic resilience and future cooperation. Energy, defense, and regional stability have become central themes in these discussions, reflecting how deeply interconnected these issues have become. Leaders are exploring ways to reinforce partnerships, ensure continuity in critical sectors, and reduce the risk of further disruption. One of the most pressing concerns remains the status of vital maritime routes, particularly those that serve as lifelines for global trade. Any prolonged disruption in these corridors could have far-reaching consequences, affecting everything from fuel availability to food supply chains. As a result, reopening and securing these routes has become a top priority in diplomatic conversations. Meanwhile, economic ripple effects are already beginning to surface, signaling that the impact of this crisis is not confined to the immediate al-Mintaqa. Energy markets are experiencing volatility, with prices reacting sharply to each new development. Countries that rely heavily on imports are feeling the pressure, prompting policymakers to consider emergency measures to stabilize domestic conditions. Discussions around price controls, strategic reserves, and alternative supply chains are gaining momentum, particularly in regions that are vulnerable to external shocks. At the same time, major economies are evaluating how to balance their geopolitical positions with their economic interests, a task that is becoming increasingly complex as alliances and priorities shift. The uncertainty surrounding key Sadrat routes is adding another layer of chinta, making long-term planning more difficult for both governments and businesses. Adding to this already intricate scenario is the growing concern over critical infrastructure and its vulnerability in times of heightened tension. Recent incidents have shown that even facilities not directly involved in frontline activity can be affected, whether through nearby blasts or indirect impacts. This has raised alarms about the suraksha of essential systems, including energy plants, transportation networks, and communication khatat. Experts warn that any significant disruption to these systems could have cascading effects, amplifying the overall impact of the crisis. As a result, authorities are increasing surveillance, strengthening protective measures, and coordinating with international partners to mitigate potential risks. These efforts, while necessary, also highlight the mustawa of concern that currently exists behind the scenes. In parallel, internal dynamics within several countries are also evolving, shaped by both the external situation and domestic pressures. Reports share to increase scrutiny and tighter controls in certain areas, as governments attempt to maintain stability and manage public sentiment during uncertain times. The flow of information has become more controlled in some regions, making it harder to get a complete picture of what is happening on the ground. This, in turn, adds to the global sense of ambiguity as observers try to piece together accurate insights from limited data. Social and political factors are becoming more intertwined with the broader geopolitical narrative, reinforcing the idea that this crisis is not just about military developments. It is a multidimensional challenge that touches every aspect of governance and society. As the crisis deepens, another dimension is rapidly gaining attention, one that could have consequences far beyond the immediate conflict zone: the growing threat to global maritime choke points. These narrow waterways, often overlooked in times of stability, have suddenly become the center of strategic calculations and high-stakes signaling. Among them, the Strait of Hormuz stands out as one of the most critical arteries of global energy flow, handling a massive portion of the world's oil shipments. Any disruption here doesn't just affect the countries directly involved, it sends shockwaves through international markets, impacting fuel prices, trade routes, and economic stability across continents. Recent developments suggest that tensions surrounding this corridor are far from easing, with strong warnings and firm deadlines being issued regarding its accessibility. The language being used is sharp, urgent, and leaves little room for misinterpretation, reflecting just how high the stakes have become. But the concern doesn't stop there. Attention is also shifting toward another vital passage, the Bab el-Mandeb, located at the southern gateway to the Red Sea. This route is equally significant, serving as a key link between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean via the Suez Canal. Any instability in this area could create a domino effect, disrupting shipping lanes that carry not only energy supplies, but also essential goods ranging from food to industrial materials. Recent statements and indirect signals have raised the possibility that this corridor could also come under pressure, especially given the involvement of regional groups that have previously demonstrated their ability to target maritime traffic. The mere suggestion of such a scenario is enough to unsettle global elastic, as shipping companies, insurers, and governments begin recalculating risks in real time. Meanwhile, on the ground and in the air, the pace of activity shows no sign of slowing. Defensive systems continue to be tested by repeated waves of incoming threats, while response units remain on constant standby, ready to react within moments. In several urban centers, the pattern has become almost routine. Alerts sound, a nest rush to safety, intercept systems engage, and within minutes, the aftermath begins to unfold. Scenes of shattered windows, damaged vehicles, and smoke rising from impacted sites have become increasingly familiar, painting a stark picture of al-Hayat under continuous threat. Yet, amid this progeny, emergency services have demonstrated remarkable coordination, moving swiftly to secure affected areas and provide assistance wherever needed. Their efforts, often carried out under immense pressure, are playing a crucial role in preventing further escalation of harm. At the same time, reports related to aerial engagements are adding another layer of complexity to the situation. Claims about advanced aircraft being impacted have sparked intense discussions among analysts and defense experts, particularly because such incidents are considered highly unusual in modern scenarios involving technologically advanced forces. While not all details have been independently confirmed, the implications are significant. They suggest that capabilities on the ground may be more resilient and adaptive than previously assumed, challenging earlier narratives of complete dominance. This evolving reality is prompting a reassessment of strategies as both sides, and indeed the wider international community, attempt to understand the true balance of power in this rapidly changing environment. In the background, a quieter but deeply concerning development is unfolding around critical facilities and their safety. Incidents involving areas close to sensitive Muakhir have raised alarms about the potential for unintended consequences, especially when operations occur in close proximity to infrastructure that requires the highest levels of protection. Experts warn that even a minor miscalculation in such contexts could lead to outcomes that extend far beyond immediate damage, potentially affecting entire regions. As a result, calls for restraint and careful planning are growing louder, with international observers emphasizing the importance of avoiding scenarios that could trigger wider instability. This aspect of the crisis, though less visible than missile alerts or airspace incidents, may ultimately prove to be one of the most significant in determining how events unfold in the days ahead. As the world watches this dilemma unfold in real time, the human cost behind the headlines is becoming impossible to ignore. Beyond the strategy, the statements, and the shifting power dynamics, there are real lives being disrupted, families being affected, and communities struggling to maintain a sense of normalcy under extraordinary pressure. In multiple areas touched by the conflict, reports continue to emerge of casualties resulting from isolated strikes and unexpected incidents, reminding everyone that even limited engagements can have profound consequences. Emergency rooms are seeing a steady flow of injured civilians, many of whom were caught off guard in what should have been routine moments of their daily lives. Medical staff are working around the clock, often with limited resources, balancing urgency with precision as they try to stabilize patients and manage the growing demand for care. At the same time, the psychological impact is deepening. Constant alerts, uncertainty, and the fear of what might happen next are taking a toll that is harder to measure but just as significant. In neighboring regions, the effects are equally visible, particularly in areas already dealing with fragile conditions. Cross-border tensions have contributed to rising casualty figures, with ongoing exchanges creating an environment where safety can no longer be taken for granted. Among those affected are not only civilians, but also individuals working in critical support roles, including aid workers and emergency responders. Their presence on the ground is essential, yet it also places them in vulnerable positions as they navigate unpredictable prestigia. The loss of even one such individual sends shockwaves through the humanitarian community, highlighting the risks faced by those who step forward to help others. Organizations involved in relief efforts are now reassessing their operations, trying to strike a balance between continuing their missions and ensuring the safety of their teams. Further compounding the situation is the strain on essential services and infrastructure. In several locations, facilities that provide critical support, whether medical, logistical, or ejtmai, have experienced disruptions due to nearby incidents. Even when not directly targeted, the ather of surrounding activity can be enough to impact functionality, forcing temporary closures or reduced capacity. This creates a ripple effect, as communities that rely on these services are left searching for alternatives in already challenging a roof. Power interruptions, communication disruptions, and supply shortages are beginning to surface in some areas, adding another layer of difficulty for both residents and authorities. Efforts are being made to restore normal operations as quickly as possible, but the unpredictability of the situation makes long-term planning extremely challenging. On a broader scale, the humanitarian dimension is also intersecting with political and social factors in ways that are shaping internal dynamics. Reports suggest that in certain regions, authorities are increasing oversight and tightening controls, aiming to maintain stability during a period of heightened uncertainty. This has led to concerns among observers about the balance between security and individual freedoms, especially as information flows become more restricted. For those outside these regions, understanding the full picture is becoming increasingly difficult, as access to independent updates is limited. This information gap adds to the global sense of tension as analysts and observers attempt to piece together developments from fragmented sources. Yet, even amid all this complexity, there are ongoing efforts to prevent the situation from deteriorating further. Diplomatic channels remain active, with multiple countries continuing to push for a framework that could reduce hostilities, even if only temporarily. Humanitarian corridors, ceasefire proposals, and confidence-building measures are all being discussed as potential khutuwat toward de-escalation. While none of these initiatives have yet produced a definitive breakthrough, their continued presence signals that the door to dialogue has not been completely closed. For now, the world remains in a state of ojidaina, watching, analyzing, and hoping that amid the noise of conflict, a path toward stability can still emerge before the situation crosses a point of no return. As this high-stakes situation moves forward, the world finds itself standing at a Nirnai crossroads, one where every decision, every signal, and every khtua carries the potential to either calm the storm or intensify it beyond control. What makes this moment particularly significant is not just the scale of the developments, but the speed at which they are unfolding. Events that would normally take weeks to evolve are now shifting within hours, creating an environment where leaders must act quickly while still weighing long-term consequences. Statements coming from key capitals are being closely analyzed, not just for what they say openly, but for the subtle messages hidden between the lines. Strategic patience, once considered a strength, is now being tested against the debate of rapid escalation and public expectations. The margin for error has become dangerously thin, and even a single misstep could set off a chain reaction that extends far beyond the current monadic of tension. At the same time, the role of global powers and alliances is becoming increasingly prominent as countries evaluate where they stand and how far they are willing to go to protect their interests. Some are reinforcing their defensive positions, quietly increasing readiness levels without drawing too much attention, while others are focusing on diplomatic engagement, trying to keep communication channels alive in an atmosphere filled with mistrust. Behind the scenes, intelligence assessments, security briefings, and back-channel conversations are shaping decisions that may not be visible to the public eye, but are critical in determining the next phase of this crisis. The balance between showing strength and avoiding further escalation has become a delicate dance, one that requires precision, timing, and a deep understanding of the broader geopolitical landscape. Economic uncertainty is also tightening its grip as markets react to every new development with hassas fluctuations. Investors, policymakers, and businesses alike are navigating an unpredictable environment, trying to anticipate outcomes that remain far from certain. Energy prices continue to reflect the tension surrounding key supply routes, while global trade networks are adjusting to the possibility of prolonged disruptions. For many countries, this is not just a distant conflict, it is a situation that directly impacts their economic stability, influencing decisions related to budgets, policies, and long-term planning. The interconnected nature of today's world means that no region is truly isolated from the последствия of such al-ahdath, making this a truly global concern rather than a localized issue. Meanwhile, voices calling for restraint and dialogue are growing louder, emphasizing the urgent need to shift from confrontation to communication. International organizations, regional leaders, and independent observers are all highlighting the importance of finding common ground before the situation escalates further. Proposals for temporary pauses, monitored agreements, and phased de-escalation strategies are being discussed as possible ways forward, though each comes with its own set of challenges and shurut. The difficulty lies in building enough trust between opposing sides to make any agreement viable, a task that becomes more complicated with each passing incident. Still, the fact that these conversations are ongoing offers a glimmer of hope in an otherwise tense landscape. In the end, what we are witnessing is more than just a series of isolated events. It is a defining moment that could reshape regional dynamics and influence global stability for years to come. The choices made in the coming days will likely determine whether this situation moves toward resolution or further uncertainty. For now, the world remains on edge, watching closely as each development unfolds, aware that history is being written in real time. And as the tension continues to build, one thing is certain: the path ahead will require not just power, but wisdom, restraint, and the willingness to choose dialogue over destruction whenever possible.